Thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz. Here's what we're looking at. Former City Council ally turned FBI mole Danny Solis takes a stand in the corruption trial of former Alderman Ed Burke. The Civic Federation names former City Inspector General Joe Ferguson as its next president.
He called me the laziest white kid he ever met.
That's Norman Lear right there on Chicago Tonight in 2015, talking about his early family life. We revisit our conversation with the television pioneer who died last week. Now, some of today's top stories. A bombshell day in the trial of former Alderman Ed Burke. Burke's defense team called none other than Burke's former city council colleague turned government mole Danny Solis to the stand. Among other things, Solis testified that the government on occasion instructed him to lie in some of his conversations with Burke revolving around potential alleged city deals in exchange for private business. The defense then rested its case. And we'll have more on today's testimony with our Spotlight Politics team in just a bit. The mayor and alder people are going back on proposed rule changes that it would have left much of the public out in the cold if they wanted to get a front row seat to city government proceedings. Those rules would have required members of the public to make reservations and show government-issued identification to sit in the main second-floor gallery in the council chambers during meetings. This prompted a rebuke from the Better Government Association, which warned that the rule changes were likely illegal and not in the interest of transparent and open access to public meetings. A federal lawsuit accuses a former CPS teacher of grooming and sexually abusing multiple students over a 4-year period. The lawsuit names Andrew Castro, a former gym teacher at Federico Garcia Lorca Elementary School on the city's northwest side. The complaint also accuses CPS of failing to protect children from Castro.
The impact of these traumatic events on our clients is profound and long-lasting. It is crucial to recognize that this isn't an isolated incident. The Chicago public school system has a history of similar cases, a fact extensively reported, including the 2018 Chicago Tribune investigation.
Castro faces criminal charges in Cook County Court related to sexual abuse of these students. A CPS spokesperson says the district does not comment on pending investigations or litigation. And there's more on this story on our website. A man in a floppy red Christmas hat paid a special visit to students at Parkside Community Academy in the South Shore neighborhood today. That visitor, not Santa Claus, former President Barack Obama, who referred to himself as Skinny Santa. Former president read the book Santa's Gotta Go to a classroom of pre-K students and doled out a set of toys and winter accessories to all of the students. Construction is ongoing right now nearby on the Obama Presidential Center, set to open in Jackson Park in 2025. Up next, the new leader of the Civic Federation. That's right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
He spent 12 years as the corruption-busting watchdog of city government, proving to be a thorn in the side of both the Emanuel and Lightfoot administrations. Now, former Inspector General Joe Ferguson has a new role as head of the esteemed fiscal watchdog group, the Civic Federation. Viewers might recall former Civic Federation President Lawrence Msall on this program many times, imploring elected officials to practice fiscal responsibility. Were those calls heated? We don't know. But how will Joe Ferguson carry forward that legacy? Well, Joe Ferguson joins us to answer that question and more, as does Sarah Wetmore, the Vice President and Research Director, who also served as Acting President of the Civic Federation. Congratulations. Very surprising, unexpected news today, this big announcement, Joe Ferguson back in the spotlight. So this organization has been known to be a nonpartisan watchdog, advocating for fiscal responsibility. Your vision for the Civic Federation?
A nonpartisan watchdog known for fiscal responsibility, and in a way that's very much aligned with the work that I think I'm known for as Inspector General, And you mentioned the thorns, and the thorns are just sort of the things that need to be dealt with in order to smell the roses, and that's really where we want to be, is to the place where we're smelling the roses. And fiscal probity, effectiveness and efficiency in government operations, good public administration really is the road out of the place that we're in.
And that's kind of been the Civic Federation's hallmark, Sarah Whitmore. So why is Joe Ferguson the right person to continue to lead this fight?
Well, I think you heard it right there. It's a passion for the work that the Civic Federation does for improving government's efficiency and accountability, but also bringing the credibility and the knowledge base to this position and being in a position to move the organization forward into a new era.
Joe Ferguson, your predecessor, Lawrence Msall, viewers might remember, has been on this program many times. He was adamant that the city and other units of government, the state, county, whatever, they had to get their beleaguered pension system in balance and massively underfunded, as you know. How do you intend to hammer those points home? Because those pension systems are still pretty beleaguered.
So I think the message needs to continue to be struck, so it's not lost from consciousness in terms of the public. Certainly the business community is very, very conscious of this. It's going to have tax implications at all levels of government in the immediate future, which actually crowd out a lot of the social service spending that is going to be needed to support traditionally underinvested populations and to really serve the cause of equity. And so we're going to have to continue to strike the exact same notes as Lawrence, but also what needs to happen here is stitching together, sometimes competing and sometimes antagonistically competing partisan parties to come together to recognize that we really are, especially at the city level, facing a cliff. And we're going to have to come together rather than talk across the divide to sort of figure out what the solutions are that actually everybody can buy into. So it's that sort of quiet conversation, back corridor conversation, boardroom conversation, but also inclusive conversation that includes community leaders, that includes the union leaders, to actually get everybody to acknowledge, yep, we're in this together.
Well, Sarah Whitmore, there's, obviously been different philosophies on this for years and years. More pro-union folks would say just pour money into this, extend the arc of payments to pay back. More business-oriented folks have said we need to curtail at least future benefits. And then you've got the pension protection clause in the Constitution. What is the way out, given all those things?
So I think that this is a place where the Civic Federation is continuing to look into new areas where we can be making recommendations. I think a couple of different areas where it's ripe for talking include having a 100% funding goal. 90% isn't going to cut it. Moving toward that in that direction. Taking a look at further consolidation of pension funds. We have more pension funds than almost any other state in the union. So these are areas where we can find places where there are going to be savings, but also be moving toward that 100% funding goal, moving more toward full funding as we progress over the years.
Joe Ferguson, as OIG, you performed a number of audits to find efficiencies in city government. For example, moving to a grid-based garbage system instead of having it based on the crazily drawn wards that we have, because that could save money. Do you plan to continue those kinds of recommendations as your role as head of the Civic Federation?
It won't be in exactly the same sort of ground level operations that was the case with the IG, but with the same sort of mission objective, things like redundancy in government. Sarah just mentioned that there's too many pensions, and that means too much management, too many separate boards. And a real wide variability of professional management of those pensions. Bring those together and you have efficiencies right there, and you actually can elevate the standards. It's those sorts of things. It's been almost a generation since there's been a meaningful examination of city and county redundancy in operations, and there certainly has been a lot of work that the Civic Federation has been articulating in recent years, and it goes back for a long time, as to the multiplicity of levels and layers of government that we simply don't need at the state level.
The other thing about your role that I think Lawrence Msall did a lot was actually meeting with public officials, the mayor and the governor, and lobbying them. I mean, he, in essence, was a lobbyist on behalf of fiscal responsibility. There was no private client or anything like that. Are you going to do that? Are you going to meet with the mayor or the governor?
Absolutely. The job can't be achieved, the mission can't be achieved unless there is that dialogue. And I think Lawrence in the leadership capacity, drawing on the great work that was done by Sarah and her team, carried that into the corridors of power to actually put on the table both the facts and the potential solutions. But you need to bring the diverse constituencies together. You need to get folks talking across the aisle, and that only happens through relationship building.
Sarah Wetmore, Lawrence Msall, it's still kind of heavy on our hearts that he passed away a few months or several months ago now. I mean, his funeral in Oak Park was attended by the governor and by Ed Burke. His legacy, more on his legacy in your eyes.
So I think that his legacy is being the gold standard of nonpartisan advocacy on behalf of the taxpayers of the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois, but also advocating for how best to find efficiency in government, believing in the power of government to do good in the community, and making sure that it's doing it in the right way.
Joe Ferguson, before we leave you, we have to note that you are a former U.S. Attorney General and a former prosecutor, obviously. The Ed Burke trial, you did a lot of work on Ed Burke as IG, too. What do you make of the fact that the defense basically rested their case after calling Danny Solis today?
Yeah, the defense, at the end of the day, and obviously I can't talk about particulars because I was part of the investigation and the workup of that matter, but at the end of the day, my gut is it all comes down to the recordings and the tapes. It's a very, very gut-level reaction that people have, and we'll have to see.
You think those tapes and recordings are pretty, they tell a pretty clear story?
Well, they tell it, the thing is that we have this expectation of people actually exchanging money on camera. That's not this case. It's a little more subtle, and I know that both the defense bar and some of the media say, hey, it's not the strongest government case. And that's why this is a gut level thing, how the jury actually responds to the tapes, coupled with the corroborating information, and we'll have to see.
That's going to be very interesting. All right, again, congratulations, Joe Ferguson, Sarah Wetmore. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And up next, the latest in the corruption trial of former Alderman Ed Burke, as we just spoke about. Our Spotlight Politics team on that and much more right after this. Bombshell testimony in the federal corruption trial of Ed Burke as his former council colleague turned mole, Danny Solis, takes the stand, plus some big agenda items on tap for city council tomorrow. Here with all that and more is our Spotlight Politics team of Amanda Vinicki and Heather Sharon, my very good friends. Heather Sharon, the defense calls Danny Solis, and then they rest their case?
That's it. That's the entire defense for Alderman Ed Burke. And most of the time that Solis was on the stand, he was pressed about, well, exactly what did you, at the government's request, ask Ed Burke to do? And did it even matter? Because Mayor Rahm Emanuel wanted the renovation of the old post office. So even if Burke threw up every procedural roadblock he knew how, ultimately the mayor was going to override him. That was the argument put forward by Chris Gare, Ed Burke's lead defense attorney. And of course, he tried to dirty up Danny Solis a little bit, saying, you know, why did you agree to wear a wire? And he acknowledged, I was trying to save myself, because we know that federal officials confronted Danny Solis early one morning and presented evidence of a series of wrongdoings that he had committed, and he agreed to become a government informant. And for that work, which we're told is the most significant in Illinois political corruption history, which is no small feat, I may add, he will spend not a day in jail, and he will keep his city pension.
And Amanda Vinicki,
Burke, not just Burke, by the way. I mean, House Speaker Michael Madigan, there's a lot of recordings, and I think that was another point
Solis
that
was at the center of. But Solis basically admitting he's not doing this because he's a great guy and he wants to fix corruption in Illinois. He's doing it because he has to save his hide from his own very perilous legal troubles, which he has cleared of now. Is that designed to poke holes in the case, that this government mole was just doing this for his own interests and the FBI was just putting him up to it?
Yeah, it looks like it was designed to say, hey, it was a setup, sort of an entanglement.
And they've said not entrapment, but they're kind of like hinting in that direction.
They're hinting at it, right?
Because they're saying he, like they told him to lie.
Not believable,
right.
And that he wasn't, that it wasn't Burke who was all powerful, as Heather noted. I think they're trying to, because we had, of course, earlier on in the trial, people talking about how he's the most powerful, longest-serving alderman, really trying to cut those credentials to say, hey, wait, this is just politics. What do you know? And then I think there was an exchange as well. Heather was in the courtroom. I was not, I admit, but where they were talking. So what? Was this public service out of the good of your heart? And no, you wouldn't know anything about that. Really
Which,
trying
of course,
to get sort of
stricken by the judge.
But you still hear it.
Yes. So, but the idea is to get the jury thinking about, well, why did Danny Solis make all of these tapes, and can we really trust sort of what came in that? What's interesting, in my mind at least, that they didn't address at all the 3 other schemes that Ed Burke is
no
charged
Burger
with.
King,
Nothing about the Burger King, nothing about the Field Museum extortion, and nothing about, really sort of his efforts to get business for his property tax firm, which his lawyers keeps, reminding witnesses, oh, well, it was totally legal that he had those.
They did have that one witness that worked for Clafter and Burke who said, no, we made sure that we didn't mix these two things. Right. We had a whole file on that, although they did cross-examine the government witnesses. So what's next, Heather? Closing arguments tomorrow, then jury instructions? And then...
So they're going to finish hashing out the 300 pages of jury instructions tomorrow morning, which means that closing arguments could start as soon as 1 p.m. tomorrow, which means, that the jury could be deliberating by the end of the week, which I think is a little bit of whiplash for people like me who have been in the courtroom most of the time, because this was a trial that sort of started and then stopped and then started and then stopped with 2 outbreaks of COVID and hours.
We waited years and years for this.
Yeah, and sort of hours of sort of minute testimony about who needed a driveway permit and who didn't need a driveway permit, and whether anybody did anything hinky with a driveway permit. So it will be interesting to see sort of the defendant's closing arguments. Reminder, Burke is standing trial alongside his longtime aide, Pete Andrews, and businessman Charles Quay.
All right, let's move on to some state news. On the abortion front, it seems a new law aimed at stopping alleged deceptive practices by anti-abortion pregnancy centers will not be enforced after an agreement between the Illinois Attorney General and several organizations that had challenged this law. Here's Governor Pritzker today defending the law and talking about the latest developments.
People should not be lied to when they're seeking health care. Yeah. This was not a decision, by the way, against the state. This was a decision made by the Attorney General simply to fall back on the existing law because it does what's necessary.
So the Attorney General kind of walking back this notion that he was going to prosecute these centers for alleged deceptive practices.
It's really a strange one, Paris, because this was sort of a hallmark agenda item for the Attorney General, getting this law passed that would go after what are widely known as pregnancy crisis centers, but which the Attorney General had argued used deceptive practices to try to talk women out of having an abortion. And so you talk to folks that say that really some of these deceptive practices totally cross the line, with people pretending to say work for a clinic like Planned Parenthood when in fact they were an anti-abortion crisis or anti-abortion center. So it's very strange, however, what we're seeing in terms of this change of tune, why this agreement, why the Attorney General didn't continue to fight the law. I think you heard the governor say that this was not something that he was in on, and I did in fact speak with the sponsor today, who says that she had no clue that there was this agreement that was going to be made. She's frankly horrified and really upset by it. She says that this is a law that the Attorney General should have fought for, and that she never would have sponsored anything that she believed to be unconstitutional, and that this is going to hurt women and leave them unprotected.
You might have thought there was some free speech issues. I want to come back to City Council. Heather, last night we had the police union president, John Catanzaro, and then the head of the Community Commission Police Oversight and Accountability, Anthony Driver. They might compromise on this controversial arbitration clause in the contract. Let's hear that exchange from last night.
We have the high ground here. We have the statute on our side. We never had to give an inch, but we offered it anyway. And the city basically rejected it because it was their proposal or nothing at all at that point.
Based on what John is saying, there's some daylight here. So I'm actually hoping to have conversations with him about how we can fix this.
So background for viewers, this clause where an arbitrator ruled that the most serious misconduct cases can go closed doors to an arbitrator as opposed to the police board in the public. City Council has to vote on this clause tomorrow. They need a 3/5 majority to reject it. Where are the votes?
So it's a good question. So I don't know whether there are 30 votes to sort of reject this measure. However, there are many members of City Council who believe it is much too difficult to fire officers who are found to be guilty of serious misconduct, and it is too hard to suspend them for significant amounts of time. So that is sort of the cross currents of this. So on the agenda tomorrow is $11 million in settlements of police misconduct, including 2 fatal police shootings that claimed the lives of people. So there is going to be a lot of debate, a lot of emotion over this issue. But if this is ratified, it means that the Chicago Police Board, which has been functioning for 60 years, will essentially no longer exist.
Right, they'll have no function anymore if this is ratified. We'll see how that goes. Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, thanks very much. And up next, revisiting our conversation with television pioneer Norman Lear. But first, we take a look at the weather. One week ago, television pioneer Norman Lear died at age 101. Back in 2015, Lear visited Chicago Tonight for an extended conversation with Phil Ponce. They discussed the impact Lear's groundbreaking shows had on American culture, including Good Times, the provocative sitcom based on a fictional Chicago family living in Cabrini Green. Take a look.
I mean, were you thinking I want to change the landscape, or were you, as you said earlier, just working hard to get the product out and make it good?
No, that's truly what was going on. I mean, I'm not, suggesting for a moment that we didn't understand we were being successful, but it wasn't what those days were about. What those days were about was working hard to get the next episode. And I was asked all the time in that period, the stress must be terrible.
Was it?
And it caused me to think, there is stress, and then there is joyful stress. And this was joyful stress because each and everything that stressed us resulted in pleasing an audience of 240 live people sitting 20 feet away from the performance.
Good Times was set here in Chicago at the Cabrini Green Housing Project. Do you remember how the decision was made to set that show here in Chicago at Cabrini Green?
There were 2 young black writers who lived here. One of them, I'm sure, Eric Monte, I think, lived here. And so he brought Cabrini Green to my attention. I would not have known about it.
You also write that there was often tremendous push and pull with Esther Roll and John Amos. Describe the 2 lead actors. What was that push and pull about?
It was, in my opinion, about, think of the responsibility and the weight of that responsibility on these 2 people. They represented, they were the first black family parents on television. Those millions of people were watching them reflecting what black life is in America and what parenthood is and so forth. That was a heavy responsibility. I think as human beings who are carrying that weight, it was too much at times.
They fought you, for example. They did not want to do a segment dealing with the whole notion of teenage pregnancy.
Yes, yeah. Their daughter was one of the most beautiful women on television at the time, and we wanted to deal with the fact that I had to think about it. And I don't know whether I understood then, but it's certainly clear to me now that the weight of that responsibility, what if we made a mistake and reflected something poorly about how African Americans would handle that situation?
You write that the character Maud was the closest to you personally. In what ways?
Because Maud was the opposite of Carol O'Connor politically. She was a loudmouth and a big, and had a lot to say, but she wasn't a student or a scholar, or she didn't know the issues the way she needed to know. And that's who I am. I talk about myself and think about myself truly as a bleeding heart conservative.
I read that. What do you mean by bleeding heart conservative?
I care. The bleeding heart part is I do care about everybody that doesn't have an even break in this country, that promises equal justice, equal fairness, etc. And at the same time, you will not mess with my First Amendment, my Bill of Rights, my Constitution, my Declaration. Those are conservative opinions in my and a point of view, more conservative than others who are, berating the fact that we promise, or ignoring, I should say, the fact that our promises are not kept yet.
That's the late Norman Lear with Phil Ponce on Chicago Tonight back in 2015. You can see the entire conversation on our website. And that is our show for this Tuesday night. Don't forget you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. Join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10 for Chicago Tonight Black Voices. A new initiative aims to redefine Chicago's decades-old community boundaries, how you can participate, and the incredible journey of a 17-year-old who has earned her bachelor's, master's, and now her doctorate degree. Amazing. Now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe and have a wonderful evening.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud to recognize its 20 attorneys who have been named in the 2024 edition of the Best Lawyers in America.